I think we're live. Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome to September Illumina. Can you guys see me and hear me okay? Give me some feedback. I've got a new computer today, a totally new system set up. So I am hoping that we're going to have fantastic audio and visual tonight. Can you guys see me and hear me okay? Yay! Okay, so we are ready to rock and roll. Tonight's a big night because we are talking about shadow work, and we're talking about Pluto, and we're talking about Pluto in the houses, or Pluto through the houses, which is really the most important thing that your natal chart is going to tell you about your shadow. So tonight we're going to talk about fear, and we are going to talk about how to manage the energies that come up around Pluto depending on its placement in your natal chart. So to get the most out of tonight, hi you guys, to get the most out of tonight, you do need to know where Pluto is in your chart and what house it sits in. So if you don't know that information, astro.com is really, in my opinion, the best, easiest place to go and run a natal chart, but there are lots of programs online. So whichever program that you use to find out your birth chart. Can you give me some feedback in the feed and let me know, do you guys have your chart? Do you need to run your chart? Does everybody know where Pluto is and which house Pluto is in? That will be helpful for me to know. So tonight we're going to talk about journeying. I'm not journeying, but shadow work. I have all of your questions printed out. I also have a lot of notes and things to go through with you. I'm going to teach you, I always show you my little notes. I'm going to teach you my shadow wheel tonight. This is my perspective on how shadow work unfolds. And we're going to talk a little bit about alchemy. If you guys like this tonight, then we'll extend this conversation through October Illumina 2. And if we feel like we get to the bottom of it tonight, then we don't have to continue the conversation. We're going to talk about the North Node and your Dharma in October, but we can certainly extend our conversation about shadow work too. Okay, very, very cool. So you guys know which house it is in for the most part, which tonight, that the placement of it in the house is more important than the sign, although we'll talk about that too. And so as long as you know that placement, you're in good shape. I'm going to turn the air on in here really quick. Hold on just a second. I am menopausing in a big way, and so I have to make sure that it's not 3,000 degrees in here when I'm teaching. So I'm just going to turn the air on for myself really quick. That is much better. Okay. Cool. So some of you are here live. I'm so grateful. Some of you are going to be watching later, so I just want to say hi to everybody. I'm going to show you the giveaway for tonight, but I'm going to do the giveaway in our Facebook group because there are quite a few of you who can't be here in person. But when I was in Denver, I found the most beautiful pair of pyritized ammonites. They are fully pyritized. Do you see that? And by that I mean that pyrite and quartz, to a certain extent, grew over the ammonite as it fossilized. So that is a complete shell of pyrite. In my experience, I haven't seen this before. You may have seen it, but I've never seen a fully pyritized ammonite. It's almost rainbow. And so the wholesale price on this was $100 for the pair because it's rare to find a fully pyritized ammonite. So I would say that you can make your best guess about what the retail value would be. But I am gifting this to one of you, the pair of them, because, and I'll explain why tonight, but of course the ammonites represent the Fibonacci sequence. This is the deepest magic. Truly, the Nautilus or the Fibonacci is one of the most important sequences in sacred geometry and the mathematics of life. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about it tonight, and then I'm going to go into the group tonight and choose a winner. Aren't they gorgeous? So we'll talk about this. Pyrite is really important for shadow work. You can use pyrite. You can work with Lemurian jade, which has pyrite and magnetite and quartz all together. But pyrite represents the transforming of base metals to gold in the alchemical process of what they call in alchemy, or in alchemical terms, the process of the great work of your life. which is to go through to excavate your shadows, to bring your shadow issues up for healing, for consideration, to bring them into the light, and then to integrate them and become a fuller, more whole version of yourself. So to me, ammonites are medicine of that. But to find a pyritized pair, I was like, this has to be a gift to someone who's doing the deepest of alchemical work. Did you see the pyrite or the ammonite necklace that was in the shop too? That's another one. So if you're doing this work and you want a talisman, that's one of the most beautiful. The ammonite necklace I have in the shop this week is one of the most beautiful ammonite necklaces I have ever seen or offered you. So that's another one you might consider. You do have 20% off sagegoddess.com all the way through midnight tomorrow. That is just for you. So please don't share the code. It's Illumina 20. And so anything that you want that's calling to you, you get an extra 20% off as my gift to you, just for today and tomorrow. So enjoy. Okay, so I'm going to dig right in because there's so much to talk about over the next hour. And like I said, my hope is that you'll get a lot out of tonight. I hope it'll be really eye-opening for you. This is not anything we've ever discussed in Illumina before. This is new terrain for us, and I think that's very exciting. You're very welcome, by the way. I think it's really fun when we get to go somewhere new together and make sense of something that's been in your chart all along. In fact, you may have had your natal chart pulled for 20, 30 more years than that and may not have known how much of just a storehouse of information is sitting just in the placement of Pluto in your chart. So like I said, tonight I think it's going to be very eye-opening and revealing. I'm so glad you're excited. You know, getting to know you is the work of your life. Some people think getting to know their partner or getting to know their children. What I would say is, no matter how well you think you know yourself, there's always more to learn. There's always more to understand. And one of the things about shadow that's really challenging is that everyone has one. I want to start by saying that, and I'm going to smudge in just a second. But I want to say when we talk about shadow, I'm going to take it all the way back to basics tonight because some of you have been studying this for a long time, and some of you, when I say shadow work, you might be looking at me like I have no idea what that means. So I'm going to take it back to a little bit of the basics tonight, and then we'll just kind of fast forward and look at the astrological perspective of it too. So good. Okay, so I'm going to smudge. Hopefully you have smudged today. We are still in the new moon corridor, and so we are working with medicine of new beginnings and new possibilities, and what can be created in the darkness. What can be created in the darkness that can bless us in the light is always the question of the new moon. What can be created in the darkness that ultimately can bless us in the light? And so pulling forward that wisdom for you and for me and for all of us today. Okay, very grateful for that. So I'm going to make sure I answer your questions too. And like I said, I've got my own notes that I want to go through. So we're going to kind of dig right in. You are welcome, by the way, to ask questions all the way through. Okay, so I'm going to try to look at the feed periodically and just make sure that I'm seeing your questions. I may not answer it right in the moment because I may know that I'm going to answer it in just a minute with what's coming. So bear with me. Thank you, Colin, for that. Bear with me till I'm still recovering from bronchitis. I've got my cough relatively under control, but she does rear her ugly head every now and then, so I've got plenty of tea and good things on standby, so we should be able to get through pretty easily tonight. Okay, so shadow work. For me, shadow work is really about the work of Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, who is a psychoanalyst. It's funny because I was first introduced to Jung in my psychology classes as an undergraduate, and then in my psychology classes as a doctoral student, we were also refreshed on Jung. Jung primarily worked through the archetypes. So Jung believed that in our conscious and our subconscious mind that we take these archetypes, okay, we take these persona, and we enact them. We basically, it's almost like putting on a mask, right? So there's the archetype of the mother, for example. And so when we are in the mother archetype, we are enacting those energies, we're working through those energies. Some of the archetypes we work with in the light, meaning that the broadest, fullest, most public parts of ourselves are sometimes where we work through the archetypes. And some of the archetypes reside in our subconscious. And so it's very interesting. And in a metaphysical world, we've sort of co-opted the work of Jung and extended it to talk about different archetypes. Archetypes that reside in the subconscious and sometimes appear, and then we have to work through them. In a lot of cases, too, we can see the goddesses themselves as archetypes of the shadow, right? And so think about some of the darker goddesses, right? Like Hecate, for example, is oftentimes an archetypal energy that people will talk about as residing in the shadow. And she represents the darker parts of ourselves and our attempts to integrate light and shadow and create balance within our own soul, within our own spiritual life. And so that's where, a lot of the language around archetypes and around shadow, all of that comes out of the world of psychoanalysis. And it's been adapted and co-opted and taken into the metaphysical world. So now it gets kind of thrown around, but I want you to know what the roots of all of that are. In my opinion, shadow work is the death of the ego. Let me say that again. In my opinion, shadow work requires the death of the ego. It's not a permanent death, right? It is the death of one part of who you think you are. But it's very, very, very important. And what I want to say about the shadow, it is, Cindy, so that's why I was mentioning, right, the light and shadow archetypes of Jung, right? Because the light archetypes are all the archetypes that are easy for us to look at because they're the ones that we show the world. The shadow archetypes are the ones that we hide a little bit and repress a little bit. Sometimes they've gotten us in trouble, or sometimes we're embarrassed of them. And so the work of shadow is to take all of the light archetypes that are active for you, take all of the shadow aspects or the archetypes that are active for you, and integrate them into one collective, right? So that ultimately what you're living is one cohesive vision of who you are, to the extent that that's possible. Now, not all of your shadow needs to be integrated. So I want to kind of go through some stereotypes or some myths from my perspective and at least course correct them from where I sit. And then, as always, I'm very zen when it comes to learning, right? So take what works from what I'm sharing and leave what doesn't. I'm really offering you my perspective on all of this, having done this work that we're talking about tonight for the better part of 20 years, in a very serious way. Although I would tell you, I was introduced to Jung in the mid-90s when I was a college student, 92, 93. And so that gives you sort of a timestamp on how long it's been since I was first introduced to the concept of archetypes and light and shadow and all of these terms too. Okay, so what a lot of people think is in shadow work, you have to find out all of your shadow aspects, all of your shadow archetypes, and you have to integrate them with all of your light, and that's the total sum of who you are. In my experience, some of the stuff that's in your shadow actually needs to be released and not integrated. And that's a really important point to make, because in my experience, I have not heard anyone else say that. When I hear people talk about shadow work, which isn't very often anyway, I hear them say, oh yeah, you got to excavate and get in there and get all the muck and stir it all up and bring it up and then find some way to integrate it and collapse it with the light of yourself, the part of yourself that you know yourself to be. But some parts of your shadow are karmic baggage. Some parts of your shadow are deeply dysfunctional and sometimes dangerous parts of your psyche, subconscious, both your material DNA as well as your spiritual, your soul DNA. And some of that comes up not to be integrated, but to be acknowledged and released. Does that make sense? And so I want to put that out there, because I don't want you to feel like, gosh, I've stirred up all this, these parts of myself, and now I have to find a way to make that fit. And so people come to me and say, gosh, how do I make this thing fit? It doesn't feel like it's even part of who I am, and it doesn't feel like it's even productive for me to work with. And so for a lot of us, the process of alchemy is much more complicated than it would appear, because not only do you have to go and excavate all that stuff and look at it, but you have to decide what comes, what goes, what needs to be integrated and what needs to be released. And it's true, and you know when you're in it. I'm not in a heavy shadow phase right now, but there have been years where the shadow part of my work was really active. I'm in a phase now where I'm kind of witnessing others. It's very interesting to me. And a lot of times what happens, and Facebook becomes this really interesting proxy for this, when people are doing a lot of this work consciously or subconsciously, what they end up doing is projecting a lot of it onto other people. So they're pulling up all their stuff, but then they're sort of like showing it to other people and projecting it as if it belongs to someone else. And so it's like, you have to be really aware when you're going through this process of what's yours and what work that you're doing, and not assume or be very conscious as you pull stuff up and you're looking at it. Be aware, like, yes, this is mine. Don't try and put that on somebody else. That's not fair to do to somebody else. And it also prevents you from doing the work of looking at what is your own stuff. To a certain extent. So Jessica's asking, doesn't what you integrate and let go change the older you get? Well, I will tell you this. I don't think shadow work is ever really done. I think there are years where there's more of it to do than others. Okay? And that can be because of life circumstances. Big changes in your life, births and deaths, major anniversaries, major life events, marriage and divorce, those can precipitate the untangling of some of these really old shadow knots. That can precipitate some of that work. And so sometimes you feel called to do shadow work, and sometimes the shadow work says, hey, we're doing this now. And it's almost like you have to go along for the ride whether you signed up for it or not. So just be prepared. Sometimes you'll be sort of invited in, and sometimes you'll be dragged down. But it does tend to happen this time of year. This is the time of year when we see it. Now, here's another kind of reality that I want to share. The only danger when it comes to shadow work is not doing it. And let's play that tape for a second, okay? I have plenty of people in my life who've said things like, thanks, Athena, what you do is really interesting. I'm good, you know what I mean? Like, I've done all that. I've looked at all my baggage. I'm in my 30s or I'm in my 50s, and I'm good. I pretty much know what's in there. And then, all of a sudden, because they haven't really done it, okay, that stuff just rears its ugly head. And that can look like people just all of a sudden flipping out, turning on you, becoming angry for no apparent reason, lashing out. It can show up in the form of different kinds of dependency issues. But all of a sudden, when people are sort of out of character, that's usually a sign. And like I said, so the scariest thing for me is not doing the work. It's actually not doing the work. Because the reality is everyone has a shadow. And the only question is, have you seen it? When I haven't seen people's shadows, I wonder. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I'm always talking about it. I mean, mine comes up for me all the time, and I've learned how to kind of dance with her. I've learned to recognize her. I've learned to kind of see what her signs and her needs are. Do you know what I mean? But there are people who would say, I don't have a shadow. I've never seen it. I've never worked with it. I'm good. I've done all that stuff. I've been through therapy, and I'm just thinking, like, you just haven't seen it yet, or you haven't shown it to someone yet. But I think for me personally, what I always tell people is, if I'm going to have an intimate relationship with somebody, I need to know what that looks like. I'd rather they show it to me so that I can see it. But it sure does sort of, make you feel a little, I don't know what the word might be, unhinged when you see someone's shadow for the first time, especially if you weren't anticipating and it comes out of nowhere. It's like, whoa, Yeah, and I think even for young people, which is why one of my big goals with my kids is I'm constantly telling them, feel all the feelings. There isn't a single feeling that I want my kids to repress. I may not like seeing it, but I really want them to work through, because what happens is, starting when we're young, people say things like, don't get so angry, or you need to control that, or that's not acceptable, or you can't behave like that. And there needs to be some place in our lives where we can be authentic and really express and experience the full range of our emotions. Not to say that it's okay to do harm to people, but I just think that's really, really important too. People in your life, especially little ones, because if you're in a parenting role or any kind of a surrogate parenting role and you're a role model, you need to create space for people to be able to express their full range of emotions. It's very important. Okay. The other thing I want to say is the dark night of the soul. Okay, that time that you go through in your life where it seems like it cannot possibly get any harder or any scarier or any more sad or any more difficult. That time, which we've all been there. We've all had a dark night of the soul before. The dark night of the soul is actually part of the shadow integration process. So when you're in that phase, or when your client is in that phase, or when your student is in that phase, what I really want you to remember me saying this to you. Remember to tell them what good news that is, because it means they're in the process, and it means that they will get through it. It's almost a sign that they're in and probably coming to the close of a big shadow integration releasing cycle. It's actually really, really, really good news. Now, you cannot stay there. This is the one thing I must tell you about the shadow. And I have plenty of people in my life who, for whatever reason, seem to really enjoy being there, okay? That darkness, and this is the piece I want to say, because the one thing I've always tried to communicate since I started teaching this class and any other class is, light and darkness are part of one whole. You can't have one without the other. There is no light without darkness. Anybody who tells you that there is not telling you the truth. They are two parts of one whole, right? Even in our universe. But the reality is darkness is very seductive. It's very powerful. It's very seductive. And darkness, in my experience, would really like to have you stay. Okay, when I hear the myth of Demeter and Persephone, I am always reminded of the fact that a lot of us come close to eating the pomegranate seeds. Do you know what I'm talking about? A lot of us, when we get into that shadow phase, and sometimes it's a friend that pulls us in. You know what I mean? They're going through a difficult time, and so we go down that rabbit hole with them, and all of a sudden they're not coming out of it, and then we start realizing, like, whoa, I'm getting depressed, and I'm getting discouraged, or I'm getting angry, and I'm getting sad. Darkness is seductive, it's powerful, and it likes company. And so there has come a time for me, and I'm just sharing with you again my perspective, right? Beth Ann is very true. She said it's hard when you watch those you love stay there. At some point, it is a choice. Are you going to stay there? If you're going to stay there, that means certain things, right? Certain people will be able to stay there with you, and certain people won't be able to stay there with you. I highly recommend you don't live there. You can visit the shadow, you cannot live there. That is just my candid advice to you. If you find yourself in extended periods of the dark night of the soul, it's oftentimes because you're not progressing through the rest of the stages. And so that's why I want to walk you, before we even talk about Pluto, before we even talk about Pluto, I want to walk you through my model, okay? Because if you get stuck in any of the phases, what I'm hoping to give you tonight is a little bit of a roadmap about how to get out, okay? How to get out of that. Because you should not get stuck in any of the phases of shadow work. You should go through it, but if you find yourself getting stuck or seduced into that place because it's murky and it's difficult, right? You need to consciously pull yourself out of that. And you can find allies to help you in that work as well. I mean, I feel like I spend a good chunk of my time pulling people out at their request, right? Like, I'm stuck. I feel like I can't get through this. I feel like it's been dark for so long. I feel like I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then in our society, what we do, I'll take a picture of this, Haley, and just post it in the group. It's a shitty little, it's my notes, but I think you guys will be able, once I describe it to you, I think you'll be able to make sense of it. So I'll just snap a quick iPhone picture when we're done tonight, and I'll just post it in the group so you have it. But one of the things, what was I going to say about this? I don't know, sort of lost my train of thought, but I will put that in there for you. Yeah, Jessica said, she lost a great friend because she couldn't get back and I couldn't stay. And do you know how many relationships end like that? One partner's in, the other partner can't. They want to, but they can't, right? Because usually in a partnership or a friendship, there's one person who's conscious one person who's more conscious than the other usually. And so that varies, right? Like sometimes you're the more conscious one, sometimes the other person is the more conscious one. It depends on what's going on in your life. But that is the saddest ending to a relationship in my experience, when one person cannot get out and the other person, and it's unfair to expect people to pull you out. I mean, we are here as spiritual teachers really having this conversation, and so to some extent we need to be trained in terms of helping people and facilitating that. But in general, it's not really the work of a partner to salvage you right from the cycle. And so anyway, it can be very, very difficult. Yeah, well, and I hear you, Cindy, and I have let mine take over too. My shadow's fun. I mean, I have a shadow that isn't fun, and then I have a shadow that is fun. And, so I'm always, when I see the fun one come up, I'm always like, woo, here we go, right? But then it's like, that's scary too. Because the shadow usually has fewer fears. And so it can end up taking you places that you don't know how to navigate. It's very difficult. And Robin's sharing that her husband struggles. A lot of us have partners who struggle. So if it's not you, sometimes it's a partner that struggles. And so the same kind of rules of engagement apply. And it can be really tricky. And sometimes you have to, especially again as a spiritual teacher, because I see all of you as spiritual teachers. So I don't see you as, I'm not having this conversation with you as if you aren't. And so again, sometimes in a relationship you play this dual role, right? Of someone who is doing your own spiritual work, is a student and a teacher of these spiritual practices, and then somebody who also loves someone who's stuck. And so I think that can get really tricky too. So the worst of, taking it all the way to the far end of the spectrum, the worst of substance abuse issues, the worst of oftentimes what we see in suicide is the absolute seduction of the shadow and the inability to extract oneself from it. And so in any case, I see all of you in the feed, and I know that I know how tricky it can be. So let's talk about it. So I'm going to show you the wheel that I have created right here, and then I'm going to walk you through the stages. Okay, so the stages. The first stage, consider this first stage, and we're gonna go clockwise. Okay, it looks counterclockwise on the screen, but we're actually going clockwise. The first stage of shadow work in general is actually your own spiritual awakening, meaning that before shadow work begins, usually there is, and you guys are way past this. I'm sharing what happens in general in terms of the stages that I have observed. So this is Athena's guide to shadow work. Well, self-medicating is a sign that you're doing shadow work and that you're struggling, right? So if you find yourself eating your feelings or smoking your feelings or drinking your feelings, it's often a sign that you're in shadow and you're struggling. And so you're trying to find some way to lift or to lighten or to push and to subdue, right? It depends on what your self-medication of choice might be, right? So the first stage of even entering into the shadow work playground is spiritual awakening, meaning that you come forward, you decide you're on the spiritual path, you want to learn, you want to expand, and usually there's a sense of excitement, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow, I'm going to understand tools, I want to know more about, astrology, and I want to know more about numerology, and I want to know about crystals, and look at all of this. It's like a playground, right? That first step towards spiritual awakening is that. Then what happens, and let me know if I lose you guys, because it's a little bit of a complex process, but I'm trying to break it down very simply. Then what happens usually after the playground phase of like, oh, isn't this fun and exciting? You come to an awareness of duality. Okay? Somewhere in that playground, you start going, whoa, there's light, but there's darkness. There's good, but there's evil. This is exciting, but it can be scary. There are things I can control, but there are things I can't control. There are parts of myself that I'm starting to understand more, and there are parts of myself that I don't understand and that are scaring me, okay? Or I'm starting to get more intuitive and I'm starting to see more about people and I'm able to help them, but I'm also seeing a side of people where I can't help them, or where they're stuck, or they're trying to pull me down. Is this making sense? When you become conscious of duality, you also become conscious of separation. Okay? Now, what I'm walking you through right now basically is the alchemical process. I'm just putting it in some different terms because alchemical terms are really hard to understand. Okay? So yeah, so the next star is, let me show you my beautiful shitty model that I drew for you. The next star is consciousness of duality, okay, which leads to the dark night. You go from playground time, like, oh, this is fun, look all I learned, to holy shit, there's a lot I don't know, and there are parts of me that I don't know. And so not only does this tell me that maybe the universe has things in it that I can't see or trust or understand, but there are things in me that I can't see or trust or understand. Does that make sense? Okay. That is really, in a nutshell, the impetus, the origin, if you will, of the dark night of the soul for many, many, many people. It is the coming to the awareness that there is ultimately a separation in you. It may look like the dark night of the soul is about your partner or about your boss or about your divorce or about, losing your mom or whatever it is. It may look like it's about all those things. It's really, because everything outside of you is a reflection of you, it really is about you not being able to reconcile that there's a separation inherent in you. The good news is you fix it, okay? So there's a way out of that dark night of the soul, but that is ultimately the impetus for the dark night. Okay. Oftentimes that separation that you are feeling has something to do with your contract for coming into this life, okay? And it can be the separation between all different facets and aspects of yourself, between, the way, how you love and how you hate, between how you experience joy and how you experience sorrow. And oftentimes it's really interesting when I don't like phrases like, or terms like bipolar, okay? Because I think, we have obviously psychological associations with the DSM-4 and diagnoses and very technical language of like, here's what characterizes someone with bipolar. For example, I like to roll that back a little bit and really try to understand from a spiritual perspective, what might bipolar represent? If you really think about it in different terms, and this is why I love like taking things out of the box, we can choose to still appreciate what psychology says about bipolar. But if we try to define our own terms, I really think what bipolar is someone who is stuck in this dark night of the soul place where the separation is so expansive that they have not yet figured out how to reconcile. And so in that like, am I this or am I that or am I this or am I, it's almost like someone being in a box trying to get out is how I think of bipolar in spiritual terms. And so moving along this cycle and learning how to integrate and release. Is this making sense? I'm really glad. For me, and I know that medication is very important, so I'm not saying don't take medication or anything like that, but I really try to give people other options and other ways of seeing things, because I think we get so used to Western medical understanding of things. I know, right? The book has to happen at some point. It really does, at some point. But I think we have to get a little bit beyond all of that, because for me, giving someone a pill, which is why I wouldn't make a good doctor, for me, giving somebody a pill doesn't promise me that they're actually going to get out of that cycle. It just makes it okay for them to be in the cycle. I'm less interested in making it okay to be in a cycle as I am interested in figuring out how to get out of the cycle. And sometimes when we mask things with medication, then we don't even know where we are. It's just sort of like if we just Prozac everybody, then I really don't know how dark the dark is. I don't really know how deep the wound is. I can't, when you don't know where you are, then anyone on the spiritual side who's trying to help you or doula you through that can't really find out where you are to anchor you on this this wheel and try to turn the wheel to get you out of it. So anyway, just sharing my perspective on that. So I think that the dark night of the soul can make you feel really fucking crazy. Okay. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I have had them, I have had a couple in my life, I felt really fucking nuts. Okay. And, you know, maybe that's bipolar or whatever, but I think it's this moment of trying to get out of that box. And then you start feeling more crazy, like, no, I really got to get out of the box, right? We need to turn the wheel and figure that out. Sarah says one of the treatments for bipolar is didactic journaling, where they do meet with their irrational versus rational behaviors, feelings, thoughts, etc. Fascinating stuff, right? I mean, that to me would be a very effective treatment, because at least it gives a voice to what's rational and irrational, so that we're not trying to just pretend it's not happening, right? It's like, how do you turn that wheel? It's scary as shit to be in that place. And then trying to get off that swing to, I feel great, I feel terrible. I feel great, I feel terrible, right? Third step. We will get to Pluto tonight, I promise. But we may have to do a 2.0 on this, because obviously it's resonating. Third step is to expand to the broader field. Okay? So let's do a visual representation of this. Spiritual awakening, playground, woohoo, how fun, right? Into, holy shit, there's a separation. What do I do? I'm in this box. How do I get out? Back to, the way I get out is I expand back out to the broader energetic field, and I recognize that I am one pinpoint on that flower of life, and that there is a whole creation. There is a whole ecosystem. It's much bigger than me. I don't have to solve all the problems. I don't have to have all the answers. But I know that I am a perfect creation, and that I am part of a bigger matrix, and that there are energies and tools that I can use to free myself. And that, in fact, this prison that I feel like I'm in with the dark night of the soul is actually my own construction. Do you remember that glass box I talked about, shattering the box of illusion? Right? Like, you end up coming to the awareness that you're in your own prison, and you made it, and you can absolutely free yourself. Right? I mean, this is a choice that you make. And so actually, when you shatter that box of illusion and you expand back out to the broader field, it's almost like a return to step one, except it isn't, because you have the awareness. Does that make sense? It isn't backward motion. You're not going back to that original phase, because you're going into that broader field of awareness with a deeper sense of understanding. That yes, there's light and shadow, but you are not trapped. Okay? Yeah, I don't know what happened, Colin, but we're clear, so hopefully you're okay too. Okay. Then, okay, you expand out and you reach a state of what I call enlightenment. It's not complete enlightenment. In other words, it's not total ascension to spirit, but there is a sense of enlightenment and growth. And this is something of an aha moment. Okay, once you expand out to the broader field, you have this enlightenment moment where you say, okay, I think I get it. At the end of the day, this whole process that I'm going through is actually a perception issue. It's me not understanding that I'm part of all creation, and that at any time I can call in a different energy stream and a different experience, and I am one small part of a whole. And that becomes its own form of enlightenment. Yeah? That's exactly right. A spiral upward, Lisa. I really appreciate that. Okay, then, once you have had that aha moment, I hear you, Kaylee. I'll come back to you. You go into a phase of releasing and letting go. And this is the point of transformation. And so what you do is you decide what parts of that darkness that you have now seen, because stage 2 was looking at your own shit, right? What part, yeah, I mean, I see you, Kaylee, so just remind me to come back, okay? What parts of that shadow do you need to integrate, and what parts of that shadow do you need to release? Recognizing that some of the stuff that you are working through is this lifetime stuff, and some of the stuff that you are working through is old stuff. Mother's stuff, grandmother's stuff, great-grandmother's stuff, shit from past lives, right? There are so many people in your web of souls that their issues with you are not of this lifetime. I've encountered that. I had an experience with somebody a couple of years ago at Sage Goddess. I just looked at the person and I had this complete glimpse of a past life where I didn't know exactly what my relationship was to this person in that past life, but I had this total feeling come over me of religious persecution. Like almost to the point where I wanted to get out of the room with the person, because at some point I knew for sure that person had either judged me or worse, on some level of religious judgment or persecution. I could just see it and sense it. And it's like, so if I had not had that awareness, and then let's say I got into a conflict with that person, I might think it's about something happening right now without realizing that, God knows, I mean, maybe 500 or 600 years ago, I was, being judged for some religious something, and that person was on the other side of that, right? I mean, I just had that feeling. And so that's why you have to decide. Some of the stuff that comes up for you around shadow is in need of integration, and some of it just needs to be let go. And ultimately, for me, it's true, it's a web of souls. Ultimately, that is a question for you and your guides and your higher self. That is your tribunal that's going to be able to tell you, is this something that you need to work on and integrate, or is this something that you need to release and let go and surrender? What gets tricky is if there's two people involved in that web of souls. One may be like, yeah, I want to let it go. I want to release it. And the other one may be like, nope, I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to try to integrate that. And it can bind you. It can actually keep you in a sort of in a place of having to iterate that relationship over and over and over again. And again, sometimes you have awareness of that, sometimes you don't. Once you have released and let go, the next star around the wheel is integration. So this is the process of really deciding, this is sort of like the putrefaction stage of alchemy, right? Like letting it all rot and die. And then basically what's left after all of that is what needs to be consumed, is what needs to be integrated, is what needs to be worked with ultimately. Then the next step is alignment, because once you integrate, then you can find out what that center looks like. And your whole life becomes this process of constantly recentering. What does the center look like now? What does the center look like now? What does the center look like now? And constantly allowing yourself to ask that question and answer it. And then the last stage is peace. And we don't talk about peace very often, but peace in a spiritual sense comes from having walked this whole medicine wheel of shadow integration, of alchemy basically, and coming to a place of, I have looked at it, I have freaked out, I have screamed and yelled and cried, I have then come to an awareness that I'm part of a much bigger whole, and I'm actually held by a divinely intelligent universe that supports me and desires to meet my needs. Yay. And then from that place of clarity and understanding that you're held and supported, right? I'm so glad this is resonating with you guys. From that place. Now, if you find yourself not getting to that place, it's because you need to go back to that stage where you have the grand reintroduction to the broader energetic field. For many people, that's what the shamanic rebirthing process is for. That's what we're doing with our Samhain ritual, actually. So the timing is really, really good, because that's exactly the work that we're going to be doing at the end of October together. Yes, and so partners, here's where this gets really tricky. If you're lucky, and I say if you're lucky because I really do think it's a fortunate thing if you and your partner go through this at the same time. But what happens if your partner is at the spiritual awakening phase where it's all like, woohoo, right? Bhakti fest, right? And you're in the shitty dark night of the soul phase where like you can't bear it. And then all of a sudden you're back out into the field of awareness and you're understanding that you're part of the greater whole and that you're supported. And then all of a sudden your partner is in the dark night of the soul. It's like you can end up feeling like you're chasing each other around this wheel. Does that make sense? And so what I'd love to see, especially, Kaylee's mentioning her partner, there is possibility for transformation in every partnership at every level, no matter how bad it is. I know that's not necessarily a popular thing for me to say. And some relation, the only line I draw is abuse. I think every relationship can be healed and transformed. The only time maybe that's not warranted is when there's abuse. So I do draw a line there. But I absolutely think it's possible for even when you're with a partner who's saying things like, I don't want you, and I don't want this, and I don't love you, and I don't love this. Do you know what voice that is? That is the voice of the dark night of the soul. That is a voice crying out and saying, help me. I can't do this. Because what do we do with the ones that we love? We lash, we throw things, we emotionally, not us probably, I don't do that, but I'm in a different place, right? People who have not been doing this work and are not totally aware of what they're doing can be very hurtful in that dark night of the soul place. They can say things, do things that are unspeakable and sometimes unforgivable. And that becomes a line that you have to draw and you have to figure out. So I won't make that judgment for you. But man, that dark night of the soul can look all kinds of fucked up. And what I can tell you is, at least in my relationship, sometimes it's really shitty and mean, Haley. Let's just call a spade, right? When I have gone through it multiple times. I don't know how mean I was, but I was hurting, and frustrated. And for sure, Dave's gone through that rat wheel with me a couple of times too, from all kinds of stuff, childhood stuff and all kinds of shit, right? And that can look like projecting, right, of parental crap onto the marital relationship and all kinds of shit. And part of what I love about Illumina and Sabbatical is that we do kind of talk about this crap, because I don't see a lot of places where people have these really honest conversations. But the reality is, when you and your partner are in these places where you're hurting each other, that actually is the point where you have the deepest possibility for transformation. And if you can hold on, and if you can teach and support and love through it, the rewards on the other side, especially if you can both get to that place of integration and alignment and peace together. Not that it's going to stay that way forever, because again, shit happens, you get back on the wheel. But the next time you go through this, it's not quite as bad. The time after that you go through it, it's not quite as bad. And you can actually, start to have even safe words with each other. Like, listen, you start going through that shit again, let's have a word. Let's say walrus is our word. So it's like, walrus, you know what I mean? Like, I'm starting to go through my shit side of the wheel again, walrus. I'm like half joking and I'm half not joking, right? Because, but I really do think part of how I see intimate relationships, I try to be a safe person for the people that I love, where, of course, there's lines that you draw, but I try to make sure that the people that I love can say and do and express and know that I'm still going to be there. I'm still going to love them. I'm talking about people I love. I'm not talking about, strangers. I'm talking about people I love. I try to make sure that I'm a really, really safe. Don't judge me, Cheryl. I chose walrus because I don't know. A safe word has to be a word you really wouldn't say any other time, right? So walrus is not something I say very often, but it's true, and Lisa's right. Men don't talk so much, or they get angry, they yell, right? Or they say mean shit, or I don't know. I don't know how the divine masculine in the shadow phase of the dark night of the soul, how it shows up in your life. But it can show up as withdrawing and being reclusive. It can show up like all angry and pissed off. It can show up as like hitting a wall, or yelling at I don't know, a family member, or I don't know how it looks in your life. But I want you to start to see that that's actually an opportunity for you to say, I think I know where you are, and I just want you to know you're not alone. You guys are cracking me up. I think I know where you are. I want you to know that you're not alone, and when you're ready, I can help you. Yeah? When you're ready, I can help you. And can you imagine if you had a guide? In my dark night of the soul, I did have a couple people in my life. Nobody said exactly that, though. Nobody said, you know what, I think I know where you are. I mean, after I had my daughter, I went through a dark night of the soul because I had just the most fucked up postpartum depression and, just all kinds of life circumstances. And at my job, I was being discriminated against because from their perspective, I took too much maternity leave, and I took the legal amount, but I was, really judged for it, openly judged for it. And so it was just this really scary, dark night where I felt like I wasn't doing well, and I had postpartum depression, and what did I got myself into? And I had 2 kids under the age of 2. And my husband was traveling all the time, and you just go through these things, and it's just like, I remember I wish someone had said, you know what? I think I know where you are, and when you're ready, I can help you. What I would have given, honestly, in just one of those moments, to hear those words. Like, you know what? I see you. I think I know where you are. When you're ready, I can help you come back. Yeah. I think that's what spiritual teachers do. Yeah, it was illegal, what happened to me. It was discriminatory. Like most women, I didn't do anything about it because I couldn't afford to. So you deal with the shitty pickles of discrimination. I have always vowed to be a better employer as a result of that. But it happens. Isn't it so good? Yeah, and look, I mean, we're all human. We are all human. But there's nothing more beautiful in my experience than when someone is lashing out at you, and when you hold, right? Neutrality, right? And then when they're done, you look at them and say, I think I know where you are, and I love you. And when you're ready, I can help you. I'll be here. I mean, now I'm saying that is sainthood to a certain extent, but that has been my goal, is to be that for other people. But if you're going to be that for other people, you better work this shit out in your own life. I'm telling you, like, you can't authentically show up and help anybody else navigate their process if you are not navigating your process. So please, this is like an ethical thing. Please, before you go out in the world and try to doula other people through this, please make sure that you have done your own work, because if you haven't, it can actually trigger your stuff, and that can come up in really dysfunctional ways and end up being projected onto a client or projected onto a student, and you don't want to do all that, That's no good. Faux shizzle. That's right, Lisa. Do your work first. Okay, so I'm gonna go through. We have to have a 2.0 on this, you guys. I mean, I'm at 6 o'clock. Can you believe we've been together for almost an hour? And I'm just getting to Pluto now. So what I would like to propose is maybe a bonus session, or we do a 90-minute in October, and we pick this up and sort of continue the conversation. If you want to. I mean, as long as you feel like this is a good use of your time. Yeah, because, I mean, and the reality is, I could probably teach a whole year-long course just on this. I don't, like I said, I don't talk about it in this way with other audiences because people aren't ready for that. And let's be honest, if you look at Facebook as a microcosm, right? Look at, not so much, like I said, not really sabbatical and Illumina, because you guys are knee-deep in doing your work, very serious students of these practices. But man, like, think about some of the big public Sage Goddess groups. Those people are so in dark night of the soul with no awareness, right? And really not understanding where they are, and certainly not understanding how to get out. Like, can't you plot people on this wheel now? Do you see where people are in your life? Right? It's a really interesting sort of template, isn't it? Yeah, well, we could. One of the things, I was planning to stop Illumina in December because I kind of feel like I've given you a lot of the things that I wanted to give you over the last 2 years. So I was sort of thinking about pausing Illumina and just continuing with sabbatical and Gemwise of Arrow Magic next year. But one of the things we could do is think about doing a special topics course for Illumina next year, where we do a year of shadow integration or a year of something like that. Yeah, I don't ever like try to just continue things for the sake of continuing them. I would leave the Facebook group up, but in terms of like teaching classes and stuff, I wasn't sure exactly what to do in 2018. So, okay. Well, so here's what I would love is I would really like your feedback. Like, what would you be interested in? With by the way, with no obligation. Like, if we decide to do 12 months of shadow integration and you're like, I'm not really into that, I wouldn't take it personally at all. So it just would be like, what's interesting to you? Maybe, Lisa or Cindy or Karen or Robin, any of you actually, if you'd be willing to just post in the Illumina group and maybe get like a thread going of ideas for 2018 of what you would like to study, and then I can kind of roll that around and see. Yeah, if you're interested, like I said, my plan was to kind of keep the Facebook group so you all have a place to hang out and just continue the courses, but we can certainly keep it going. The shamanic wheel would be beautiful too, and we actually could do a year of we could do a lot of different things, right? We could do that. We could follow the shamanic wheel. We could actually do a full year of shamanic practice to really like take that aspect of your practice a little bit deeper. Because of course, shadow work is shamanic. It really is. Shadow work is the deepest part of shamanism, right? Because shamanism is really about understanding the nature of the source of trauma. And then going in and actively working with that source of trauma to release and transform it in the service of becoming more integrated and evolving further down your soul's path. So I think that's something that we could do too. So anyway, if one of you would just be kind enough to start a thread, I honestly, I'm really, really, really curious what you would want to do. And I'm doing some of my own courses and things over the fall, late fall and winter. So I'll have more to offer you even. And so anyway, lots to think about for that. That would be a fantastic idea. We could do a year of shamanic training that ends with certification in shamanic practice. And by the way, you guys may have seen, because I've been talking about it, I'm actually working to fully accredit all of my courses next year. I'm using my PhD in education to leverage that to make sure that my courses will become accredited. My goal at some point is actually to have something of an online university. That's like pipe dream down the road just a little bit. I think it's possible. But at the very least, my goal is to have all of my classes accredited next year for continuing education units and so forth. So anyway, can you imagine having a fully accredited program in shamanism or some of these other topics? I think that would be really cool. I know. Right? And honestly, if we get it accredited, some of these courses accredited for next year, then it could apply retroactively if we decide to do some sort of full degree program or certification program down the road. Boom. I mean, the Akashics, for God's sake. I mean, that's a whole other arm of this and direction that we could go. I am getting ready to post a blog on holographic reality, and that's sort of like, at least for my team, was quite mind-blowing when I shared it with them. And so we could do a whole series on holographic reality and understanding the nature of multidimensional experiences, right? And so that could be a whole other arm of it too. And there's a lot left to do. Guess we're continuing. Okay. So what I'm going to do tonight for Pluto, let me just quickly tell you what Pluto is. I know we need a 5-year plan. Everybody's going to end up with bachelor's degrees in magic by the time or master's degrees or whatever it would be. The work continues. Okay, I'm going to tell you about Pluto, and then I'm going to, here are my notes. I'm just going to go over what your, depending on the house where Pluto sits for you, what your primary fear is. That's what I'm going to give you tonight as like a little teaser, okay? Good night, Kaylee. Is she signing off? I hope you're okay. Sending you a lot of love. I don't know if you, I didn't see if you were able to respond to my what I shared, Kaylee, but I hope it resonated with you. Lots of love. We all love you. Well, Mandy, honestly, I really do think 20 years from now that this is going to be a norm. And you know what inspired it? I was sitting with Zoe the other night, and she looked at me. This may sound kind of crazy, but she looked at me and she said, yeah, so there will be a certificate for Holistic Healer and Illumina this year. You will get a certificate at the end of the year. So that goes without saying. This is just for people who want to continue, and then next year, when the courses are accredited, the certification will actually be good for continuing education and so forth. So I'm sitting with Zoe the other day, and she looks at me and she goes, Mama, all I want to do is learn about magic and help you. And I was thinking, we do so much to try to force our kids to conform. She has a different learning style, right? I won't say, learning disability. She doesn't have, I don't even like that phrase. As a teacher, I don't like it. But she learns differently. And so part of me is like, we we force our kids into this system to get these degrees, because we think it's like what they should do, instead of thinking about, like, some people are meant to do this work. And can you imagine if you knew that early on and there'd been some sort of degree program in the healing arts, for example, and that you could actually get very specific focused training early enough where, by the time she'd be my age, how much more information would she have if she hadn't been forced like I was to fit into the box? And anyway, so she'll continue in public school and so forth, but it did get me thinking a little bit. It's like, there should be degrees in this. If you can get a degree in business, I think you should be able to get a degree in magic. She's got a good teacher, I gotta tell you that. She's learning a lot by example, that's for sure. Okay, so Pluto, ladies. Pluto, ruler of Scorpio, right? The god, so here's the correspondences, right? The god associated with Pluto is Hades, as you know. So true. Pluto rules the subconscious, rebirth, renewal, change, death, transformation. Pluto is considered the father of the phoenix. So Pluto actually gives birth to the entire concept of rebirth and transformation and renewal. And so Pluto, in that sense, also governs survival. Okay? All right, good night, you guys. Those of you who have to sign off, I'm only going to keep you for another 5 minutes. I just want to tell you, I'm going to go house by house and tell you what the biggest fear is. I just want to give you a little nugget for tonight, and then we'll continue this on. If I could start, honestly, I'm telling you, someone other than me, probably because I'm so busy, is going to figure out that all of the children that are coming into the universe right now who are on the autistic spectrum are here as some of the most magical practitioners and teachers ever, and they're going to figure out how to work with those children, how to teach those children, how to love those children and support those children, and they're going to cultivate those children, and those children are going to create an entirely different world, a different paradigm for us. Every day, do you know that my Zoe, who was in class last year with a student who was severely autistic, every single day, and he was disruptive, he wasn't even all that nice to her. She's not in class with him this year, and do you know what she says to me every morning? I hope Charlie has a good day. I hope Charlie has a good day. I hope Charlie's having a good day. She thinks of him every day. They're here as teachers, and even my child recognizes it. So it's like, I think at some point somebody's going to crack that code, and that's going to change our planet. But that's me on a soapbox. Okay, you ready? So I'm going to just talk about the fears, Pluto through the houses one by one. I know. She even wrote Charlie a little love note. She folded a little, it looked like a little paper hat, and it said, "To Charlie from Zoe." And I don't think she gave it to him, but the fact that she sat there drawing something for him when she doesn't even have class with him anymore, that's my girl. Okay, Pluto in the first house. The first house is the house of self. You should try to memorize what the houses represent. It'll just really help you. And they only represent one thing. Each house represents one thing, so it's pretty easy. You ready? Pluto in the first house, which is the house of the self. Your biggest fear is confrontation and being exposed. People with Pluto in the first house are so worried that someone's going to find out. It's almost like imposter syndrome, and it almost never happens because these fears that Pluto represents are usually very irrational fears, I should say. These are not typically things that are going to happen to you, okay? So Pluto in the first house, which is all about intrigue and intimidation, but so there's a lot of themes around that, but really what they're afraid of is that someone's going to see something in them that they don't want anybody to see. And again, it's an irrational fear, so part of the work with Pluto is, can you name it and tame it? You know what I mean? Okay, let me recognize that this is irrational and let it go, right? So Pluto first house. Pluto in the second house, this is the house of value, okay? This is about self-worth, and one of the biggest fears for people with Pluto in the second house is a fear of poverty, a fear of not having or not being enough, not having enough and not being enough, okay? Pluto in the second house. Pluto in the third house, house of communication. Pluto in the third house folks are obsessed with truth. My husband has Pluto in the third house. And they are absolutely, their biggest fear is being taken advantage of, being duped somehow. They always think that someone's trying to pull something over on them, and very rarely is that the case. So again, if you can name it and tame it, you can recognize, look, this is irrational, this isn't really going to happen, and so. But one of the things with Pluto in the third house, we see a lot of early childhood trauma in this population. And so part of why they're so afraid of being taken advantage of is that someone usually, at least in early childhood, took advantage of you first. And so later in life, it's almost like you expect other people to do it too, and you have to, again, name it and tame it and sort of let go of that, because it can start to color your relationships. Pluto in the 4th house, which is the house of home. This is a fear of someone learning something about your family secrets, particularly has to do with parents, okay? Usually there's something in like people with Pluto in the 4th house sometimes have secret family lives. Maybe friends don't come over, or there's something in the house, or something that you feel like people shouldn't see. And so Pluto in the 4th house represents a fear of exposure of something in the home. Pluto in the 5th house, house of creativity. There's a fear here around loss and betrayal. You have this fear that something in your relationship is either going to represent a loss to you or a loss to someone else, or that someone will betray you, or that you will betray someone else. This can also show up in you projecting onto your partner that they're going to betray you, when the reality is they're probably afraid that you're going to betray them. This can be a sign of instability in relationships and a lack of trust. And so again, you have to name it and tame it and work through that. Pluto in the 6th house, which is the house of service and health. There's a big fear here around criticism, and also a fear of illness. These are the hypochondriacs. Sorry, Pluto in the 6th house is the hypochondriac. You're also afraid of being told that you're wrong. And the reality is most people with Pluto in the 6th house are very healthy and don't get criticized. So again, these fears become irrational, and you have to name it and tame it. Pluto in the 7th house, which is the house of relationships. This is a placement of power struggle in relationships, so just to be aware of that. And there's a fear about relationship problems. The ultimate fear there is divorce and separation. And so really trying to, and some of that can be reinforced by unstable parental relationships early in life, which show you sort of a paradigm of separation or divorce or anxiety on those fronts. So that is the fear in the 7th house. Pluto in the 8th house, which is the house of death and regeneration. This is a real sexy, sticky place for Pluto to be. It's the second most mysterious, I would say, because Pluto in the 12th house, which is my placement for Pluto, and a lot of you too, is a very dark placement too, because the 12th house is the house of secrets and the greater mystery. So the fear here in the 8th house is a fear of losing control. It's almost that fear of the dark night of the soul. How many of you have Pluto in the 8th house? Interesting, right? Even if you're cuspy, go with your primary placement for Pluto, okay? So that's you and that's you. Fear of losing control, and fear of the potential of your own darkness to overtake you. And so having to reconcile that. Does that make sense? Pluto in the 9th house, which is the house of philosophy. There's a fear of judgment, of being judged by others or ridiculed by others. Sometimes for your beliefs, but sometimes just for who you are. This can be that can be reinforced by early experiences of being bullied as well. So just to be aware of that. Pluto in the 10th house, which is the house of status. There's a fear of failure, and there's also a fear of control, because people with Pluto in the 10th house really struggle with authority. They don't like to be told, you do that, and that's how it's going to be, and you're going to do this like this. And so they fear too much control over them, but they also fear failure. They don't want to look like a failure. They don't want to be perceived as a failure. Pluto in the 11th house, house of community. The fear there is isolation, fear of being alone, fear of being left alone. People with Pluto in the 11th house fear dying alone. And so there's a lot of things around being alone. And so one of the things you can do, again, to name it and tame it, is to understand that that's a fear that could be active for you, and recognize again that lots of times the fears that Pluto sort of surfaces are irrational fears. Pluto in the 12th house is the house of secrets and shadows, and so the fear there is the biggest fear. Pluto in the 12th house, people, that is fear of demons, your own demons, other people's demons. It's the fear of what you don't know with Pluto in the 12th house. But Pluto in the 12th house, people, let me say this, because this is really important. Are you ready? And Haley, I see your question. I'll try to get to it in the next session, so just remind me. Here's what I need you to know. Pluto, let's say Pluto 1 to 12, okay, in the houses. The deeper you go, Pluto 12 is the deepest shadow work that has to be done. Pluto 1 is the lightest shadow work. So if you have Pluto in the 10th, 11th, 12th house, it's usually a sign of advanced lifetimes and usually a sign of deeper excavation that has to happen. It's almost, what I like to say is, if you have Pluto in the 10th, 11th, or 12th house, you have to do shadow work. It's not like you don't get a pass. If it's first, second, or third, sometimes in this life you get a pass, because a lot of times the shadow issues with Pluto in the first, second, or third house are not as heavy, not as anchored, not as old. When you get to Pluto, and by the way, it also has to do with the expansiveness of the shadow, okay? Shadow with Pluto in the first house, that's just about you. I mean, how deep are your shadow issues, right? Like this. Pluto in the 12th house is the collective shadow. Up here, you're worried about your shit. Down with Pluto in the 12th house, you're worried about your shit and everybody in the United States shit and everybody in the universe's shit and people outside of this universe's shit. So it goes from being up here where it's like relatively manageable, I guess, down here to where the nightmares and night terrors for Pluto in the 12th house can be practically disabling, okay? And so as someone who lives with Pluto in the 12th house, I can tell you you can manage it, but this is the placement where you really have to commit to doing this work in a big way. And you don't have Pluto in 10, 11, 12 for nothing. You have it because you're here, you're ready to move through these cycles, and then by going through those cycles, you then become a good mentor and teacher for people who are going through the other houses. Does that make sense? Right on the line of 11, 12, Valerie, so you are in that place. Yes, there are a lot of, I have actually, in terms of my natal charts, the funniest thing, I have what they call a typical presidential profile. I have Sun in the 10th house in Leo, 10th house being public service, public leadership, Leo being the sign of that, life path 110, Pluto in the 12th house, Libra rising. These are all, I have what's called a typical presidential profile. Not that I want to be president, but it's funny to think about that I may have the skill set that's sort of like recommended. Honestly, I wish I was president right now. There's only so much I can do in a day. But yeah, so it's funny to because there is a very typical presidential profile, and it does tend to represent Pluto in the 12th house, which I think is being able to understand the undercurrent of a broader constituency, right? Like not looking at your own issues, but really being aware and able to acknowledge the broader collective and how the collective could work together. Oh, I love you guys. I could never do it. I'm too weird, I think. I don't think our country's ready for me. Although I didn't think they were ready for what's happening right now. So maybe. That's awesome. Tell Russ I said cheers. He's all set. Yep. Great question, Cindy. Does Pluto being retrograde at our birth affect any of this? Yes and no. Pluto's retrograde right now, by the way, which just means that you're being given more opportunities to practice than usual. And so if it was retrograde at the point of birth, I would say that's probably, that aspects you, that would indicate that you came in primed maybe to do some of this work, to be able to do this work more easily, or at least being given more opportunities to do this work, I should say. Oh, I love you, Robin, for that. Yeah, so the signs matter too. So let's do this for 2.0. You guys ready? I'm going to make myself a note. So for 2.0 of this, we're going to do Pluto with the signs. I'm going to dig a little deeper into the houses. And then we're going to do, this is the 2.0, and then we're going to move into the North Node and your Dharma. And we're going to connect your shadow with your Dharma to make sense of all of that in 2.0. It sure does go direct next Thursday, and I'm ready for it. We've had a lot of shadowy situations, especially with that incredible, the bookends of the my words are escaping me, the eclipse, which was a complete shit show in August, right? So like, I think all of us are ready to be done with eclipse activity, backward energies, shadow stuff coming up for renewal and integration, even if you're not ready or interested in doing that at all. A Pluto retrograde says, I don't care if you're ready for that. That's exactly what's happening right now. So I think it's very interesting. Okay, so Stephanie, hold that. We'll try to get into more of the intricacies. I know when we get into astrology, there's so many questions. I mean, literally, that's why it becomes this like lifetime fascination, right? And that's why I was turning all of you guys onto Mercedes Munoz, because she is a very gifted astrologer and can actually interpret your entire chart for you. So if you're not a holistic healer and didn't hear me talking about her, just remind me, and I'll also put her contact information in the Illumina group, because she's a fantastic resource. I think she's busy for a minute. Okay, so, and then I'm going to post this in the group too, and I will be choosing a winner tomorrow for these beautiful pyritized ammonites, which will be good shadow excavation tools for you. And then don't forget, you have code Illumina20, but only until midnight tomorrow, to save 20% off anything on sagegoddess.com that you want. You guys okay? I hope this was interesting for you. Lots more to come. Thank you for putting the post in the group. We'll talk about 2018. So I'm going to put the giveaway in the group. I'm going to take a picture, as Haley requested, of my little shitty diagram and put it in the group. And then I'm going to look forward to reading about all your ideas for 2018 and talking with you there about all of that. Thanks, you guys. What a night, huh? We sure did a lot of work together in the last hour and 20 minutes. I had a blast. No, I don't think our shipping rates haven't gone up international. Not to my knowledge. Not at all, actually. So if you're seeing any discrepancies, just send an email to Magic and we'll take a look at it for you. All right, cuties. Thank you for loving my shitty diagrams. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good night.